When we have more information hiding, at that time efficiency will be high because user will not knowing its internal working. So if all the persons are writing a code for a same problem, or all the developers are writing a code for a same software problem, at that time complexity will going to be increases. In order to communicate or in order to establish a relationship between one module to another module, then we are going to use this interface. Hello everybody, a warm welcome to one and all. Welcome back to the session 6 of unit 3 of B.C.A 6th semester, subject called Software Engineering. I am Rohini TS, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So before getting into our today's session, we'll just have a quick recap of my previous sessions. As we all know that in the last session of this unit, we have discussed regarding coding. So in this coding, we are going to convert the structure design into some programming language, right? So that is what we are going to call that as a coding. And also in this coding, we have four kind of approach. In that we have learned regarding top down, and also we have learned regarding the bottom up programming, and also I have discussed regarding the structured programming. So we are left out with information hiding, right? So that is what I will be discussing in my today's session. So we'll see what do you mean by information hiding and why it is necessary, and also I will be discussing regarding this coding documentation. So now feasibility study is over, requirement gathering is over, analysis of that requirement is also over. After the analysis that needs to be designed, design part is also over, and coding has been done with the help of some of the programming techniques, and also after that coding, it is necessary or mandatory to do that as a documentation part. That is what we are going to learn in the coding documentation. Let me get into the session that is with respect to information hiding. So let me give you an example why information hiding is necessary. So we all using washing machine and ATM, along with that we all are using social media. But do we really know how it is working internally? Somehow we won't bother, right? So why? Because all the information, how it has been implemented, what kind of algorithm they have used, user usually won't bother in order to get to know how they have implemented all those things. Instead of that, we will just focus on the essential feature. That means I must know how to use washing machine or ATM, but I won't bother about how it has been implemented internally. So, information hiding is necessary in order to hide the content or a background details or internal working of any of the system from the user. Then we are going to call that as a abstraction as well as information hiding. So, when we are doing some maintenance or when we are changing something with respect to design or coding part, that should not affect the usage. So that's why information hiding will mainly focuses on hiding the non-essential details of the functions and code in a program. So it mainly focuses on hiding the non-essential detail which is not necessary for the user to get to know, and also the details of function, what function they are using, how the function has been called, what are the methods or methodology they are using. So user should not get to know regarding all those things. So when we have more information hiding, at that time efficiency will be high because user will not knowing its internal working, and also code in a program so that they are inaccessible to other components of the software. So when one working condition of one software or a module is dependent on another modules, so then there will be more complexity, or complexity will going to be arises in a effective manner. So that this information hiding will going to help in order to be that as a inaccessible module to one component to another component in a software. And also the software developer applies information hiding in software design and coding mainly to hide unnecessary details from the rest of the program. So when there is a program dependency or a data dependency from one module to another module in a software, then that will going to increases the complexity. So in order to reduce that, the models or a design, whatever the coding that has been done should be independent in nature. That can be accomplished with the help of this information hiding. And also the main objective of information hiding is to minimize the complexity among different modules of the software as as I discussed now. So when there is no dependency or when the components are independent to each other, at that time complexity will be less. But when there is a dependency, when there is more showing of a data or its detail to another module, at that time complexity will be high. So that the complexity arises when one program or module in a software is dependent on several other programs and modules. So when there is no abstraction or when there is no independence among the different modules or data or programs, at that time complexity will be high. In order to reduce that, we have to follow this information hiding, and also it's mainly implemented with the help of interfaces. How we are going to hide the information? That too with the help of this interface. So here interface is a medium of interaction for the software components that are using the properties of the software modules containing the data. So for example, if I have 5 modules in my software and each module will going to have its own data, right? So then in order to communicate or in order to establish a relationship between one module to another module, then we are going to use this interface. It's not interdependent on each other. Each module will going to have its own activity or process it will going to perform, but it will going to act as a medium or it will going to accomplish a relationship between of interaction for the software components that are using the properties of the software modules which contains the data. So with the help of data, we can establish a relationship between one module to another module. For that, we are going to use this interface. So that the implementation of interface depends on the syntax and process. So on what basis we have to have this interface implementation? That will be based on the syntax and process. What structure it must include and what is its process or methodology that is using. So based on that, we are going to implement this interface. Then what are the examples we can expect when it comes to the interface? It can be constants, data types or types of procedures, and also we have some more things in order to explain the examples of this interface. So that specify the constant, variables, and what is the data type, what is the procedure, whether it is calling function, called function. Based on the type of procedure or a method, we can give as an example for this interface. And also mainly this interface protect other parts of programs when a software design is changed. So when all these modules are independent to each other or which is not dependent on each other, at the time if I am doing some changes to this module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4, and here I have module 5. So if I am doing some changes to this module 1, should not affect the module 4 or it should not get affected by other module when other changes are made in another modules. So that can be established with the help of this interface that will going to protect other parts of program when software design is changed. So when we are using WhatsApp or any of the social media account, at the time if they are doing any updation in the background, that won't affect on the usage of that application, right? So that is with the help of this interface or information hiding. And also the mainly this interfaces will going to act as a foundation to the modular programming. So that is also known as what? Top-down programming, and also this will going to act as a foundation for bottom-up approach also. For C++, C programming, all those programming languages is based on or it will going to have a foundation of this interface. And what we mean this interface when it comes to the object-oriented programming. So here interface of an object comprises of a set of methods. So if you consider the classes and objects concept, there we have a data members as well as member function. Data member specifies what kind of data it includes and what are the members we have. When we have member function, that specifies what are the functionality it is performing on that data. That is what we are going to have in this object-oriented programming. When we are using interface, in that it will includes the object comprises of a set of methods which are used to interact with the objects of software programming. So when we have one or more objects in a particular class or object oriented programming, at that time the communication between objects are important. Then how the relationship it will going to be established in between the objects, or how communication will going to happen, that too with the help of methods or what we call that as a function. So with the help of that methods we are going to have a communication between the objects. That can be done with the help of this information, and also it assures the information hiding. So that information hiding that will going to help in order to convert or to divide a single program into several modules. So when we are following a modular approach, at the time it will be easy for the maintenance and also for the efficient usage of each module, so that these modules are independent of each other and can be used interchangeably in other software program. So that when we are using this modular approach, or when the problem is divided into number of modules, at that time each modules are independent to each other. So when it is independent to each other, then if we are making any changes to one module, will not going to affect the other module. So these are the benefits we can get when we are having this information hiding. And also we'll consider one example here. Consider a program written for a car. So here what we have, class, consider a class called car, and also the organized in several ways. So with the help of some of the programming languages, this programming, in order to make the car work, we can write any other program here. So mainly one is to arrange the modules without using a information hiding. So I can write a program for a car, that too without using a information hiding methodology and with the help of information hiding methodology. If we are not using a information hiding methodology, at that time the modules can be created as front part, middle part and rear part. So when there is no information hiding, when the modules are dependent on each other, at that time it will going to be divided into front part, middle part and also we have a final part. So what if we have a information hiding? I won't bother how engine is working, how steering is working, how brake is working, how seat has been arranged. So being a user, I won't bother about that. But I want a functionality, but how internally it is working, that's none of my business. So at the time, when we have information hiding for the implementation of this car program, at the time instead of taking this as a front part, middle part and rear part, at the time it will going to specify the name of a modules as engine and steering. So all these are independent to each other, then there is no dependency among the different modules of a system. So when we have this modules called engine and steering, then there will be more information hiding. This is one of the example how it will be when there is no information hiding, when there is a information hiding. So now it is found that modules created without using the information hiding affect other modules. So if I am doing some changes to the front part, then it will going to affect on the middle part of a car. And also if you are doing some changes to the last component or the final part, that may affect the content of middle part. So that there must be a information hiding. So how one module will going to get affected by another module when we don't have this information hiding? At the time when a module is modified, then it will may affect the data. So even though I don't require the modification, or even though I don't wanted to make any changes to another data of a same system, so when we don't have a information hiding, that may affect the content of another module. So that if the modules are created using information hiding, then the modules are concerned only with the specific segments of a program and not the whole program or other parts of a program. But when we have this information hiding, at the time module will not going to depend on another module. So at that time this will going to help in order to make a modification only with respect to particular segment of a program, and it will not going to affect another content of a program. So we can establish isolation here. So when we have a isolation, even in the transaction, that should not affect other transaction and should not get affected by another transaction. Even that methodology is also going to be implemented. So with respect to our example like car, so if we have what front part, middle part and final part, Instead of that, if we have an engine and steering, how it will going to be helpful? So in our example, this statement means that the module engine does not have any effect on the module steering. But when we don't have information hiding, then there will be some changes if you are doing to the final part may affect on the middle part or a front part of a car. So that is one of the example. So all these are related to information hiding, and also it's very important question for 5 marks. So if you see the previous year question paper, so there will be a question which is based on the information hiding concept. So concentrate on this topic. Let me move on to the next one. So till now we have done with the abstraction, information hiding, coding, everything is done. Then now it's our duty to convert that into some documentation part. That is what? Coding documentation in software engineering. Why this coding documentation is necessary and what it is, we'll see here. So here code documentation. So till now we have coded, that means we have programmed for a particular problem to be solved. So in this, what do you mean by code documentation? So it's a manual cum guide that will going to help in understanding and correctly utilizing the software code. So whatever we are programming or whatever the content that we are writing should be in the format of document. So this will going to help in order to understand what is the logic of that program, why it is has been written. And also this will going to help in order to make a proper usage of a software code which has been written by the programmer, that too as per the requirements of a customer. So that the coding standards and naming convention written in a commonly spoken language in code documentation, which will going to provide enhanced clarity for the designer. So when the designer is designing or when we are having a re-engineering or reverse engineering methodology, at that time it must be understood to the designer in order to make some modification or changes. If he doesn't know how it is working or what are the modules we have, what are the programming code that I have written with a particular module, at that time this will going to be difficult for the designer to understand the program segment. So when we have some standards and naming convention which we are going to use in writing a programming language, that has to be written in a common English language or in the normal speaking language. So just by looking into that or reading into that documentation will going to help the designer to understand what this program does, so that they act as a guide for the software maintenance team, and also mainly focuses on maintaining the software by improving and enhancing the software after it has been delivered to the end user, while the reusability very important. So when we have a documentation, if I know what it has been like, if I get to know what has been done in the programming or how it works, if we don't know, then I can't do the modification. If I only know the how it is working properly, then it will be easy for me to do the enhancement or a maintenance or a modification. But with the help of this documentation, we can get all those information. So if we got all those information, then it will be easy for the performance, or it will be mainly easy for the maintenance team. So when we have this proper maintenance with respect to the documentation, if the user requires some changes, or if they wanted to use the same modules in any other program or application, at that time we can have this reusability. For that purpose, this code documentation is also important. And also, while writing a software code, the developers needs a proper documentation for reference purpose. So for what reason the designer or a developer require this software? For the main purpose of reference. So if they just look into that, they must be able to understand what this program was doing. So that programming is an ongoing process and requires modification from time to time. If we don't have this documentation, or if we don't have a code documentation, then we are not able to, or we couldn't understand how to change or what is the modification that requires. So if we don't know the problem, then we can't solve it. So that it is necessary in order to do the modification time to time. If I wanted to do so, then it's necessary to have a proper documentation, so that when the number of software developers are writing the code for the same software, complexity will going to be increases. So if my perspective of a software is different and another developer's perception is different, so if all the persons are writing a code for a same problem, or all the developers are writing a code for a same software problem, at the time complexity will going to be increases. But if we have a reference or if we have a previously done documentation, by just looking into that, based on the perception of individual developer, it will be easy to write a code in order to modify the content. So that with the help of documentation, software developers can reduce the complexity by referencing the code documentation as I discussed earlier. So if we know how it is working, how it was working, then it will be easy for me to do the modification. That will also going to reduce the complexity. And also here we can see that we have some of the documenting techniques here. That includes commands, and also we have a visual appearance of code and programming tools. So then why this comments are important and how this comments or visual appearance of a codes and programming tool is considered as a some of the technique. So when it comes to the commands, that commands are used to make the reader understand the logic of a particular code segment. So even in C program and C++ program, initially we are going to write a command, right? If it is the double slash, it will be single line. So and here you can write the commands in another way. When we have more than 2 lines of a commands, then we can use that. So when we have that commands that specifies what the program is doing, so we will get to know what is the logic of that program just by looking into that command. So that command is mainly used for the making the reader understand what the logic or what is the logic of a particular code segment. And what about that visual appearance of a code? That mainly is the way in which the program should be formatted to increase the readability, how it should reach to the user for the purpose of readability, whether it should be in the form of text, whether it should be in the form of images, videos, audios, what kind of data it should be represented in order to specify the working condition of a system. That is regarding visual appearance. Then what is programming tools in code documentations? So here we have a algorithm, flowchart, as well as we have a pseudocode. So all these are the example when it comes to the visual appearance of a code. So how the working or logic of a program, so that may be represented in the terms of algorithm, right? It will be a step-by-step procedure. And also we have a flowchart. That algorithm has been converted into some symbolized form, that is flowchart. After that we have a pseudocodes. It will be in English language. So it's a collection or a mixture of algorithm as well as normal speaking English language. So by this methodology, this will going to improve the enhancement of appearance or visual appearance of a code. So just by looking into that, we will be able to understand what is the logic of a system or a program. And also we have a code documentation that contains source code. So here you need to understand we have a source code and object code. Source code specifies the code which has written by the programmer, right? The programmer who has written a code, that will be considered as what? Source code. If it is converted into machine language, that will be considered as object code. So here code documentation contains the source code which is written by the programmer, which is useful for the software developers in writing the software code. So if we have that, then it will be easy for the developer to write a software code. And this code documents can be created with the help of various coding tools that are used to generate the code documents. So here we are going to use some of the coding tools in order to improve the writing of this code documents. Mainly it will be used in order to auto generate the code documents. So if you have a drag and drop, and also if you see the web pages, so there we are going to do the designing, but if you right click on that and if you see the source code of that, then you will be able to get to know what is the logic or how they have written. Main example for this auto generate code is related to drag and drop. So when we are dragging any text box and if I am dropping all those text box or radio buttons and all, if you see its backend, then automatically it will going to generate the code. That is also one of the improved methodology in order to make the code documentation, so that these documents extract the command from the source code and create a reference manual in the form of text or HTML file. As of now I told here HTML file. If you just right click on the web page and if you see the source code over there, then you will get how it has been implemented. so that it will going to mainly helpful in order to consider that as a reference. It will going to create a reference manual in the form of text or in the HTML file or a web file or a page, so that the auto-generated code helps the software developers to extract the source code from the commands. So as I told earlier, when we have this drag and drop, so instead of writing a source code, if I am simply using that commands, if I am simply using that element, automatically or auto-generately it will going to generate the source code from the commands. That is what with respect to code documentation. And also mainly this documentation contains the application programming interfaces, how the one page should interact with another page of a application, and also data structures and algorithms whatever we have used in the programming. And also we have two kinds of code documentation, one is internal documentation and another one is external documentation. Then what this internal and external documentation comprises of? So in the documentation which focuses on the information that is used to determine the software code is known as internal documentation. So when we have some programming code which mainly focuses on the software code, how it is working internally with respect to its logic, then we are going to call that as a internal documentation. And also it will going to describe data structure, whether we are using stack, linked list, queue, in order to represent what kind of data structure we are using and what are the algorithms we have, and also what we have in the control flow of a program. So all those details will going to be stored in the internal documentation. And also we have several guidelines for making the documentation easily understandable to the reader. So with the help of some of the guidelines or with the help of some of the standards, how it needs to be in order to make it more readable by the user, we have to follow some of the guidelines. So here we have some of the general conventions to be used at the time of internal documentation. So that internal documentation should include this header command blocks and program commands, and also we have a formatting. So with the help of this formatting, header command and also some programming commands. So by after each line or after each code segment, I am just going to write a command. This is for what? Method. These are the method 2. So in order to have a communication, we are going to use this interface. So mainly for the understandability of that particular documentation by the reader or to the reader, we have to follow some of the guidelines. So this header commands blocks are useful in identifying the purpose of the code along with the details such as how core function and how each segment code is used in the program. So this mainly specifies, this header command specifies. So usually what we say to the student when they are doing their lab programs, so we used to say like write the command. That means you need to specify what is the usage of this code. So if we have that habit of writing commands, if another person or if another student is working on that particular program in order to make some modification, then it will be easy for them to understand what is the usage of this code of block or what is the usage of this block code. So then in order to make it more readable or in order to have a reusability, it is necessary to write the header commands. So in order to identify what is the purpose of that code and what is its details which is related to how the core functions is working, how each code is working for a particular or which is core to the particular program. So all those details will be there in the header commands. And also software code is updated and revised several times. It is important to keep a record of the code information so that internal documentation reflects the changes made to the software code. So when we are having a details with respect to the source code and its algorithm and data structure, whatever has been used, even if you are doing some changes or modification, everything will going to be updated in the internal document. And also this internal document should explain how each code section relates to user requirements in the software. Mainly to satisfy the requirements of a user, we are writing a program. Even in the internal documentation, it has to specify how each code segment is satisfying the requirements of a user. So here we have some of the information which will going to be stored in the internal documentation. So it comprises of a name, type and purpose of each variable and data structure which we are using in a code, and also it includes the brief description of algorithms and its logic and error handling techniques. So if we got some errors, how it needs to be handled, all those things will be stored in the internal document, and also it comprises of information about the required input and what is the expected output of a particular program. So that all information is also going to be stored in the internal document, and also assistance on how to test the software, how we are supposed to do the testing of that software, that is also going to be stored in internal documentation, and also we have information on the upgradation and enhancement in the program. So all these information will going to be stored in this internal documentation. Fine. So we'll see about the external documentation, what it means. So we got to know regarding internal documentation. So then what will going to happen in external documentation? Mainly it focuses on general description of a software code. It won't say how it is working internally. Instead of that, it will just give the description or a general description of a software code and not concerned with its detail. Then we are going to call that kind of documentation as a external documentation. Mainly it will going to include the information which is related to function of a code and name of that software developer who has written the code, and also the algorithm whatever we have used in the software code, and dependency of code on the programs and libraries, and format of the output produced by the software code. So all some of these set of information will going to be stored in the external documentation. And also this external documentation include structured charts for providing an outline of the program and describing the design of a program. Mainly all the general description how it needs to be used, and also we are going to call this external documentation as a user manual. So all these information will going to be stored, and also it specifies what is the solution for a particular problem, why we have chosen this solution to specify or to solve a particular problem. All those details is also going to be stored in this external documentation, and also it describes the approach which is used to solve a particular problem, and what are the operational requirements we have in a program, and user face components, and all those details why we have chosen a particular solution for a problem and how it has been solved. Every description of that will going to be stored in the external documentation, and for the purpose of readability and proper understanding, the detailed description of accompanied by figures and illustration that show how one component is related to another component. So when we bring or when we bought any of our new electronic gadgets or anything new which we have purchased, so there you can see the user manual. They are going to give you the brief description of each modules or each data whatever we have in the particular system or a particular appliances that we have brought into our home, right? So it will not going to bother how it is working internally. So it mainly showcase how to use it, instead of it will not going to specify any of its internal working. So all those information will going to be stored in the external documentation, and also this explains why a particular solution is chosen and implemented in a software, and also that will going to include formulas, conditions and reference which we got it from a particular algorithm or documentation that are derived. All these information with respect to the formulas condition. So we are saying what we have used, but we don't know, or it is not specifying how it has been used. So that documentation will going to help us in order to have a brief description of all the things which is related to the particular software, mainly to solve a problem which is given by the customer. I hope you all understood. It's all about our today's session. In my coming session, we'll see what are the coding documentation tools we have. So with the help of this coding documentation tool, we will make it more readable and more understandable to the reader. So in order to we have several tools that I will be discussing in my coming session. Let me meet you in the next session. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.